More than 250 national and international experts convened at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, in October 2014 for a three-day conference co-sponsored by the Federal Reserve Banks of Atlanta and Kansas City and the John J. Heldrick Center for Workforce Development to offer their perspectives on reforming education and job training policies. Leaders from business, labor, government, nonprofits, academia, and research organizations outlined promising strategies that will improve opportunities for job seekers, students, and workers, meet the needs of employers for a highly skilled, well-educated, competitive, and productive workforce, and deliver solutions that can be adopted by government, educational institutions, businesses, and nonprofits. This video features interviews with many of the conference presenters discussing their recommendations for transforming U.S. workforce development policies for the 21st century.
The United States have really gone through dramatic structural changes in our workforce and in our economy over the last 20 to 30 years, brought upon by globalization, in other words, competition from around the world for goods and services production, by technological change. It's happened much more rapidly than it happened in the earlier part of the 20th century, and also by major industrial restructuring that came out because of that. Then comes along the Great Recession, the worst recession we've ever had in 70 years, where millions of people are put out of work very dramatically and very rapidly. And everything that happened in the Great Recession just made those structural changes worse. Now we've had a recovery from that, 10 million jobs created, unemployment rate going down, but the structural problems are still there. And then again, there's still millions of people sitting on the sidelines. They're unemployed. They are employed in part-time jobs, but they want full-time jobs. They're not earning enough money in order to be able to take care of their families, send their children to college. They can't retire when they want to. So there's a lot of these problems that remain, and the structural problems are still there. So we really need to re-engineer the workforce experience, beginning at high school and college and on the way through the lifetime, with the support of government programs, revised to be really fit the economy we have today. The one that existed when most of these programs were created doesn't exist anymore, and yet we're still acting as if it does. So we really need to find those new ways forward. And what this conference is about is really to develop solutions, to build consensus around strategies that are proven to be successful, that have been working in certain communities in certain states, raise them up to the national level, and get more people involved and behind them.
One of the things I emphasized at the very end of my remarks this morning was the importance of the formal workforce development community to become a bit more cohesive, working more closely together, streamlining their efforts, communicating more effectively what employers are looking for, where are jobs going in terms of job skills, to ensure that people who are designing programs are able to really make their programs very relevant and dynamic in terms of the changing requirements of workers. So I think a good start on a longer-term solution is a more cohesive workforce development community. I think these things are a partnership. I mean, clearly everyone has a role. The employer's responsibility is going to be dictated by what makes business sense. Sometimes that's short term, but many companies, particularly the larger companies, maybe are in a position to think longer term about how they develop and maintain a workforce that's going to allow them to be competitive for the longer term. So I think there's a certain amount of formal training. There is so much really that we learn on the job is really the skills required. It's on the job exposure and training, but I think you can create an environment in which people learn lessons while they're doing the work, and it continues to enhance their ability to be productive. So there's an employer responsibility, it seems to me. a government responsibility to intervene where there is some kind of lack of response to a definable problem, or there is an opportunity for a given jurisdiction or community that can get incoming jobs by investment or whatever if they actually support the development of a workforce to do those jobs. Those are things I think that are appropriate for government to intervene into. And then there is the individual responsibility, which I've just referred to. And I don't think we can think of workers as simply receivers of the efforts of other people. Workers have to bring to the equation their own energy, their own efforts, and their own sense of responsibility. That is, the ability to learn how to do something that you didn't do before is going to be a survival requirement for workers. So that's a little different content. That's not learning a skill, it's learning the skill of learning a skill.
Education isn't always the solution for everybody. That's another very complex thing. It's like sometimes people will say education's the panacea, it's the solution, everybody should be educated, and I certainly agree with that, but there are people and segments of our society where further education is both cost prohibitive, it's not in their culture, it's not going to happen for them, and so how do we make them viable members of the labor market? And so there has to be other things in place, much more vocationally oriented, and not hoping that manufacturing comes back and that they get those kinds of jobs, because that isn't going to happen. And so I guess, you know, my long-winded way of saying is the solutions are very complex and they're multifaceted, and they're not just the role of just government or just employers or just job seekers, but together we have to come up with kinds of a multi-strata, multiple kinds of solutions for workers and for employees to meet their needs.
I think the challenges of the workforce today, stagnant wages, unemployment too high in many quarters, the erosion of the better jobs with the better wages require a forceful, organized, far-ranging response. If we think we're confronting just a small downturn and not an important structural change, we will miss the opportunity, but we'll also miss the mark. And the mark is to build an economy today that works for our children tomorrow, to build an economy that matches the 21st century. We need to invest more, public, private, and nonprofit, into the workforce system. There was a time in the 1970s when we had significant investments in the workforce system. It's when we had returning veterans after the Vietnam War. It was at a time when we had just been through the civil rights days, and we were trying to expand economic opportunity. We need to think about how to do the same thing in the 21st century. Those investments in the 1970s, I would say, laid the foundation for the sort of economic boom we experienced in the 1990s. So to some extent, the benefits of investing more in the workforce are not going to be immediate gratification. It's going to be long-term economic growth and long-term sustainable economic growth. We've got to remember that for a nation to be great, it's got to invest in its people, its human infrastructure, and it's got to invest in its physical infrastructure, its transportation systems, its buildings, its ports, its airports, its schools, its streets. Those kinds of things pay dividends. It makes sense. They're the kinds of things we need to do. So we can create jobs by building roads, by building rail systems. We can create jobs by fixing the underground water systems in America that in many cases are 100 years old. We can create jobs by building 21st century school buildings and classroom buildings at colleges, universities, and community colleges. We can create jobs by building for the future.
So we really have to have a strategy, I think, of looking at every child and say, how do we maximize, young lady, your potential, young man? What can you do? What would you like to do? How do we help you get prepared? But we've got to end this idea that we're all disinterested observers as young people make that journey through middle school and high school, and we really don't care at the end of the day what they do. It's America. There ought to be a nation of possibilities there for everyone, but you better have a plan. And I think the community ought to say to its young people, how can we help you, young person, get ready? What do you want to do? And explain what we would offer as, boy, if you want to do something like this, we could really use you.
I think it begins by sort of a policy to embrace change. This recession has changed the future of the American labor force in the sense that there are new economic roles, be it global issues or technology or whatever, how employers package their human capital is such that the notion of part-time employment, the notion of working with staffing agencies, independent contracting, which really only affected a small percentage of the population before, are now major challenges for us. These are trend lines that are not going to be reversed. I think that the American workforce system, as an example, has always frowned on part-time employment or working with staffing agencies. It's like we didn't fulfill our duty if we did that. We can't ignore it anymore. It's here. And with respect to long-term unemployment, that's not a transitory issue. There is this process of continuous weeding out of folks. The solutions are to have programs for long-term unemployed that are relevant and stop treating the long-term unemployed the way you might have done it a few years ago. From the standpoint of dealing with folks who are low wage, that's education. That's continuous lifelong learning, so to speak. Part-time employment or contractual employment or working with staffing agencies, that has got to be cooked into our system and it's got to be made into opportunities. You know, individual contracting, which used to be reserved for certain occupations years ago, that's a way that people can be extremely successful if we did it right. So from my standpoint, the American workforce system has got to be revamped top to bottom. We've got to embrace reality. We've got to find ways. Never lose sight of what we're here for. We're here for the sole purpose of ensuring there are opportunity for our people.
Recently, the administration developed what they call the Reemployment Vision for Unemployment Insurance, which is based on the notion that unemployment insurance claimants are, first of all, job seekers and second, beneficiaries. And we need to focus on the job seeker role of UI claimants. And the way to do that is to emphasize not only making sure that individual claimants are eligible for unemployment benefits because they're able to work, available for work, and seeking work continuously, weekly, but also that they receive reemployment services, help with job search assistance such as job clubs or career information. And we need to focus on that at the beginning of their claim, not near the end of the claim as has happened in the past, but to try to make sure that at the very beginning of an unemployment insurance claim, the system communicates to claimants that they're expected to look for work and that the system will encourage them to find the kind of jobs that they want and need.
One of the most important things we need to do is get past these sort of arbitrary distinctions between workforce development and higher education. Everyone needs post-secondary education today. Everyone needs some mix of academic learning and occupational training to make it in today's economy. The fact that we have policies for workforce development and policies for education, higher education, that don't intersect with each other is a big problem. This needs to be seen as part of one big system. I'd say one of the most important areas for policy reform is around outcomes and around collecting data about student outcomes and what happens to students when they leave institutions of higher education, what happens when they get out of college, following them into the labor market. Without knowing how our graduates are doing in the labor market, it's very difficult for institutions institutions to then go back and fix their programs and align them with the labor market. We have insufficient data right now about student transitions into the labor market. It's an easy fix, and it would give us a real roadmap for what's actually happening in the relationship between education and the economy, and without it, we're flying blind. So I would say that's the number one thing to fix, and probably one of the easiest fixes that we could do.
There is not necessarily going to be this contract of lifelong employment. That may not work for the company, and typically that may not work for the individual. So we'll have to think of new ways for individuals to access training, to acquire new skills in order to respond to those types of challenges. So the workforce development system will have to incorporate kind of the new training approaches that I mentioned, or perhaps being able to provide coursework that people can access virtually or in the evenings, or not necessarily the classes that we sit in a room and have a traditional way of acquiring skills. So we will have to respond to those types of changes.
One of the things we try to do at the community college is to arm all our students with certain kinds of skill sets that we think they will be able then to go out and find jobs or adapt as jobs change. I mean, one of the other problems that I think we have to kind of confront is that learning now is in fact something that goes on for your lifetime, and that as individuals, you don't finish school at Macomb Community College or at even a four-year school. You consistently learn. Now, whether you learn on the job, whether you learn in a classroom, whether you learn with a computer, that doesn't matter. But the commitment to learning needs to be embedded inside of individuals.
I think what we need in the U.S. in the next quarter century is an approach that's about a learning system, that is about continuing learning, that's about credit for that learning, that's about how that learning results in competencies, knowledge, skills, and abilities that are translatable into job positions that companies are looking for, and give workers the mobility to build onto those, to stack them together, to really have options for their career paths going forward, and to have a shorter line of sight from where they are now to where they next want to be. And we need to find a way to, and probably a combination of public funds and private support. Almost everything, I think, in the coming era will be a public-private partnership kind of a model. There's a really strategic investment to make learning affordable for everyone, whether they're 19 years old or 55 years old, to get rid of sort of the debt burden that's associated with it right now, and to make it easy to occur, make it contextual to work, and really interconnect work and learning, and make it the way a different way of thinking about the world.
Another area is in the whole area of high quality career education starting in high school, as well as work-based learning. When I say high quality career education, I'm not talking about old-fashioned voc ed. I'm not talking about tracking people away from college. I'm talking about programs that can combine college preparation with career preparation and give people more actual work experience and more exposure to careers early in their career. And the whole work-based learning model is based on that idea. Things like apprenticeships, where you're studying, you get some credential, usually a post-secondary credential, while you're gaining valuable work experience. And the employers like it as well. For a modest amount of resources, we could expand apprenticeship and other work-based learning models. And that does two things for young people right now. Number one, it gets them skills and credentials. It also gives them the work experience that they're having trouble gaining in this economy. So I would make a big push for that as well.
I think one of the most important things to think about with the American economy and labor market is that unlike a lot of our industrial competitors around the globe, employers account for about 90% of the training that happens for workers. So if we're going to talk about solutions, we have to start with employers, I think. So I think we need to better incentivize employers to do actual training, not just for their mid and upper level workers, but for their frontline workers. And I think we've seen some falling off in the last decade of employers actually stepping up to that. So I think that would be number one. Number two, I think the community and technical colleges around the country are probably our front line, even for the employer training that goes on. Employers might finance it, but in many cases, it's the community college and technical college folks that actually conduct the training. A third one would be we have evidence coming out right and left about strategies that work better. And those strategies are what we refer to as sectoral strategies, connected with career pathways, structured career paths through community and technical colleges and higher education institutions. And I think we have the opportunity with the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. The encouragement is there. It's going to take governors, local workforce boards, teaming up with employers by sector to actually make that a bigger reality than it already is. Some places are doing a great job with it, but I think that would be really the third thing I would say.
Well, one of the things that we're looking at is Kessler Foundation is all about innovative work policies and how can we make a difference and try new creative solutions, because obviously we know what's happening today is not really working for a lot of populations, especially people with disabilities. So one of the areas that we're focused on is social enterprise, which means looking at ways that especially nonprofit organizations can establish a business that can employ large numbers of people with disabilities and at the same time provide some revenue to the organization's bottom line. Because when an organization has excess revenue, a number of things happen. It has sustainability to carry on the program, and also it can provide some other services, some of those wraparound services such as transportation, supports on the job, that they may not have other funding to provide to those in the workforce.
We need champions in the business community, kind of a push up from the business community that sends a signal to our education and workforce training systems that improving the skill levels of our workers is important to their competitive advantage. We've been working on this for years, and I think we need to have the business community to become a champion of this, and I think if they're sending signals to the education and training systems that they aren't getting the talent they need, that will send a message that will, I think, move through our education and workforce systems in ways that government can't signal that message. I mean, government can do a lot in terms of evaluation and producing data, but I think we need a strong signal for our business community. And then it's not really the other end of the continuum, but on the delivery side, we have to invest more in the capacity of those individuals that are on the front line.
At the AFL-CIO, we are talking with workers every day, whether they're in unions or not. And what we're seeing out there is that people still are struggling. The economy is on the rebound, but it's not really affecting people in the way it should fast enough. And so we would like to see, and what we advocate for, is really policies, both by the government and corporations, that lift people up. And really we need to support policies that raise wages. That's the bottom line. We've seen the inequality in our society at record highs, so we need to figure out, how do we invest? Do we invest in more infrastructure to put people back to work? Do we raise the minimum wage so that families who are on the bubble working part-time jobs that are insecure can actually bring more resources to their family for success? Policies that really provide stability, so equal pay for women, paid sick days, paid family leave. These are the kinds of things that would help working families succeed in our economy.
I'm a little bit colored, more than a little bit colored, by the German employment model, having been our ambassador in Germany for 4 years, having returned last year. And the Germans, I think if you cut through all the reasons why the German economy has been so buoyant and so resilient, particularly in the face of the European economic downturn, if you think about a country with all of its neighborhood really suffering severe recessions, I think the secret sauce, the secret ingredient, is first in their middle-sized companies, and more specifically in their dual-track training system, the duale Ausbildung system, as they say in German. I personally think a more activist role by the federal government in sort of scaling this notion up so that we can see it thrive in more than here and there instances would be a policy bent that I would strongly support. And I think ultimately, and I think here in New Jersey where I live, it could have a huge upside potential, and not just with the big metal bending manufacturing jobs, which these days are highly sophisticated, I might add, but also in what we call the innovation economy in the 21st century. So I'm a big fan of this sort of apprentice. You go to school and you apprentice and you're on that double track, and it's a rewarding career ultimately. It's a well-paying career, and it's an element of our economy that I think we are sorely lacking in at the moment.
I'd say there are two key areas in which the Department of Labor is embarking on initiatives that will help address the skills shortages we think we are facing. One is addressing populations that have certain barriers. So that may be the long-term unemployed, many of whom lost jobs in the recession through no fault of their own. It may be people who have a criminal background, perhaps far in their past, but it blocks them from getting good jobs and being considered for jobs despite their skills. It may be youth who have been disadvantaged, people with disabilities, other groups who face barriers to employment but have a lot to contribute to our economy. So that's one area in which we're investing. We're trying to make sure that they can get skills, that employers know about their skills, and we can connect them to good jobs. Another area is in strategies that we know work. So for example, apprenticeship. That's a great example of a learn and earn opportunity, which is really a win-win-win. You get employees who are skilled and trained on exactly the equipment and tasks that employers need. You get workers who can earn while they're learning for the job. Sectoral strategies, career pathways, these are all strategies that we know work. They combine learning and work experience, and the Department of Labor is investing in those kinds of strategies and encouraging not only state and local government, but also the private sector to do the same.
Have done some studies across the country in terms of the local workforce investment boards. And workforce investment boards have a great opportunity because of their structure to bring businesses to the table, to bring educational institutions to the table, and to bring economic development to the table. And some do a better job than others. It really takes leadership. And I think what we need to do in the future is really develop that leadership and capacity at the local level so that they can become, better conveners of these important entities.
From the city perspective, one of the most important things that cities themselves can do is to really help us build the evidence so that we can find out what strategies are most effective and for whom. We have a range of one-stop career centers, and a few years ago what we did is launch new Workforce One or one-stop career centers that focus on particular industries. And we started with transportation, we've looked at healthcare and manufacturing as well. And so if you go to that specific career center, all of the services there are oriented toward that particular industry. And they do take a dual customer approach, meaning they work both with the job seeker but also have a more robust relationship with employers. And that creates a really great feedback loop so that all the program services can really be informed by what employers need today. And that's what really is helping people get jobs, get quality jobs with better wages, and stay in their jobs.
What the new legislation, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, what it does, and to me in some ways, is to say what boards were starting to do in their communities during the recession. Things like incumbent worker training, things like on-the-job training, customized training, really locking in with employers. I think the bill says to them, well done. And I think it says to the rest of the system that those are, this linkage to employers is critical, and that's where the system has to go. Market-driven, demand-driven. And that's going to, that creates a very dynamic but also a very exciting environment. I don't know that there has been a better time to be in workforce development.